night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Welcome to the program. Tonight's program is very, very special to me. I don't often get starstruck. In fact, I never get starstruck. But I'm kind of starstruck about tonight's guest. We've got Dr. Cyril Wecht joining us in just a little bit. And if you've watched any true crime programs, Forensic Files, Cold Case Files, or you've seen documentaries about the Jon Benet Ramsey case, or the Branch Davidian Waco fire and tragedy that killed so many there, or the OJ Simpson case, or the Kurt Cobain quote-unquote suicide. If you've watched documentaries about any of the high-profile cases that involved death and under suspicious circumstances, you probably have seen and are very familiar with Dr. Cyril Wecht's work. And we're going to be talking about that tonight. He's written a new book called The Life and Deaths of Cyril Wecht, Memoirs of America's Most Controversial Forensic Pathologist. This is going to be a fascinating discussion. There's no way we're going to get to everything in the course of the 60 minutes or so that we've got to talk with Dr. Wecht tonight. But we're going to do our best. And his book does such a great job of not just telling his story, but telling the story of the people that he affected and the cases that he worked on. When I look through that list, it's basically a who's who of controversial cases throughout the latter part of the 20th century into the early part of the 21st. This is going to be an amazing discussion, and I'm so honored to be a host of a show that can actually interview someone with the credentials and the experience of Dr. Cyril Wecht. So you'll have to forgive me for being a bit of a fanboy here, but I'm really looking forward to this. I do want to offer a word of caution. I've noticed that there has been a tremendous number of fraudulent scam phishing emails that I've been getting. I don't know if everybody is getting these, but I just want to say something that should be obvious to everyone. If you get an email from the IRS says, click here and fill out this form and put all your information in here because we want to talk to you, don't do it. If you get an email from a credit card company that says, hey, we need to check something on your account, please enter your information here, don't do it. There are a lot of people using very clever tactics, and they disguise themselves as FedEx. They disguise themselves as DHL Express or whatever that delivery company is. They disguise themselves as the Internal Revenue Service. I don't know how they get away with it. I think they don't ultimately get away with it for long. But when they send out millions of emails and hope, 100 people respond and give them all this information, and then they steal either their bank accounts or their tax return money or whatever it happens to be, then they just uproot and they start another scam. So again, it should be pretty obvious, but if you get an email asking you to fill out anything, don't do it. It will not. If a company truly has something they need to talk to you about, they're not going to do it through an email. If you suspect it might be legitimate, let's say you've got a Citibank credit card and you get a Citibank email and you think it's legitimate, go to your credit card, call the number on the back of the card. Don't reply to the email. So that's my advice for tonight. And it's minuscule compared to what we're about to the conversation we're about to undergo here with Dr. Cyril Wecht. Again, I'm really excited about this. So having said that, and given the fact that we don't have a lot of time with Dr. Wecht tonight, I'm going to go to break, get Dr. Wecht on with us, and begin this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. As I said 100 times, and I'll say it one more. This is going to be a great discussion tonight on Beyond Reality. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, also subscribe to the Twitch channel, and subscribe to the podcast. Those are all great ways to enjoy the program as well. We are very honored and humbled to have an amazing guest for you tonight. Dr. Cyril Wecht is an internationally acclaimed forensic pathologist, attorney, and medical legal consultant who's become famous for consulting on deaths that are associated with a high media profile. His expertise has been called upon in cases involving JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Elvis Presley, Jon Benet Ramsey, Laci Peterson, Kurt Cobain, the OJ Simpson slayings, and the Waco Branch Davidian fire, among many, many others. Dr. Wecht, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It is a real honor. It is a real honor to have you on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, JV. A pleasure to be with you.
I have to also thank you from a personal level. I have enjoyed countless hours of appearances that you've made on various television programs and documentary films, whatever it happens to be, about some of these cases, which really have defined, maybe in some ways, the legal system for the past 40 or 50 years. So from a personal standpoint, you've entertained me for hours, but I also have to say the fact that you took the time to write a book not only about your personal story, but the stories of all the people that you've affected and the cases that you've been involved with. That is a real treasure, and thank you for doing that.
Well, I appreciate that. Very gracious of you to make that comment. Yeah, I decided that I would do this. Actually, my co-author, Jeff Seawald, had come to interview me for a local Pittsburgh magazine, and after a while, I think our second meeting, he came up with the idea, and then we began to work together. I decided that now was the time to put together some of these experiences in my life and to include summaries of many of the cases that I have been involved with over the years.
Well, we're going to be challenged to cover even a fraction of what you've written about in the book. And again, I'll remind folks that the title of the book is The Life and Deaths of Cyril Wecht, Memoirs of America's Most Controversial Forensic Pathologist. Cyril, what makes you controversial?
Well, that was the publisher's title. And at first I was a little shocked, surprised, but I've come to appreciate the title. I guess the answer to your question and the thought that came to their mind was that the many cases in which I've been involved, which you just listed, are cases in which other people, other experts, government officials, had expressed other ideas. And my involvement in these cases has led to a refreshing new look, allowing people to understand that things are not always the way they are presented by local or state or federal authorities, and to explain what the challenges are in the field of forensic pathology that allow different opinions to be expressed following analysis of a case.
But you're so much more than just a forensic pathologist. I mean, just to kind of quickly hit some highlights of your resume, you're an attorney. You've held political office. You are a bit of a political activist. You have looked at the justice system and found injustices and tried to correct them. You're an author. You're a television personality. Clearly, you're a radio personality. Do you think all of that comes together to help you be a bit of a warrior for people who need a warrior?
Yes. I haven't, set out with that in mind, but I'm happy to accept that characterization. I think that in these cases, I have been brave enough, and tenacious and persevering, and courageous, if I may say that, to go against authorities. And as you know from the book, I've paid the price too. I've had two different charges brought against me at different times, and I had to go to trial. And fortunately, I had wonderful attorneys, and the false cases brought against me were exposed, and I was completely exonerated in both. But those experiences, indeed, on top of everything that I have witnessed in dealing with other cases, led me to understand more fully the way in which the criminal justice system can be subverted, perverted, and utilized for malevolent purposes by prosecutors and law enforcement officers and other government officials for their own purposes.
Well, and you said, if you may be so bold to call yourself courageous, I think that it's probably an understatement. And you have paid the price. And do you think that people such as yourself, who take on a little bit of courage and try to buck the system and point out wrongs and try to right them. Do you think that you get a big target on your back when you do that, whether it's you or anybody else trying to do something similar?
Oh, yes, you certainly do. You get a very big target. In fact, the first charges brought against me in the late 1970s when I was coroner were brought by the district attorney, instigated by the sheriff, both of whom were extremely unhappy about the fact that I was holding public inquest as coroner of Allegheny County in every police-related death. They did not like that at all. That had not been done before. So any case, whether it was pursuit, apprehension, arrest, incarceration, we had a public inquest presided over by one of the more prominent attorneys in our county, sometimes retired judges, once by a Pennsylvania Supreme Court justice, recently retired. And they did not like that. And they came up with these cockamamie charges. I had to deal with them, however. I was smart enough to get myself an excellent attorney, Stanley Prizer, now deceased, one of the top trial attorneys in America at that time. And he worked feverishly, incredibly, and it cost a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, tremendous strain on me, my practice, my family. But, then I prevailed. And then the second time around, involving the U.S. attorney who was interested in getting appointed to the Third Circuit, she had already passed a local federal appointment, and she was looking for the Third Circuit. And that was at a time, too, you may recall, when this U.S. Attorney General Ashford, and followed by U.S. Attorney General Gonzalez, had made it a point to go out for officials, almost always Democrats, and get a scalp. It was scalp hunting days. Yeah. In fact, a couple of Republican U.S. attorneys paid a price for refusing to go along with that kind of scandalous activity. They brought an 84-count felony count indictment against me. 84 felony counts. And that's all they wanted was a scalp. They told my attorney shortly afterwards that if I pled guilty to one charge, then I could walk away. There would be no imprisonment, maybe some fine. And I told them to go screw themselves.
Good for you.
And after 2 years of pretrial preparation, they dropped 43 charges before the trial began. And then we went to trial. I had excellent attorneys from K&L Gates here in Pittsburgh, Jerry McDivitt and Mark Rush, and they and their extensive staff did a fantastic job. And the jury came in without our putting on any defense witnesses, because several of the defense witnesses they had called proved to be extremely helpful to me. So in any event, the hung jury, government said they would appeal, and went up to the Third Circuit. We pled double jeopardy, not thinking we had a chance. But amazingly, 3 of those top-level federal judges, all Republican appointees, came forward with their opinion and said that the case had to be handled by a new judge, their quote, with fresh eyes of an unbiased nature. And we got such a federal judge. He listened to the arguments, and then he wrote a blistering 55-page report. Meanwhile, government had dropped 27 of the 41 charges, and then the remaining 14 charges were booted out by the judge. So there you are. From the beginning to the end was 4 years, cost me over $4 million, wow. And K&L Gates graciously forgave me another $6.2 million. So actually, the total cost was well over $10 million, wow. And I was forgiven $6.2 million, but I spent over $4 million in defending myself. But I had wonderful attorneys once again, and the truth came out. And then I became a hero. I even had editorials from both newspapers, even from the U.S. Senator Arlen Specter, a Republican at that time. I'd been a Democrat. So that's the way it worked out. But it's a heavy price to pay, indeed. And I was fortunate to have a strong family, my wife and my kids, and friends. And you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
During that time, during that trial, JV, I continued to function as a forensic pathologist and medical legal consultant. Court would end at 4:00. I would go and do autopsies in these 4 or 5 adjacent counties in southwestern Pennsylvania, for which I continue to do autopsies. And I would go. Court was not held on Friday, so I had Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. During one of those weekends, I flew down to the Bahamas to do a second autopsy on Daniel Smith. I remember I had to get permission because they had my passport. So during all that time, you want to hear a story, you wouldn't believe it. If you read in a fiction book, you'd say absurd. One day in court, I finished on the 5th floor of the federal building, downtown Pittsburgh, at 4 p.m., went downstairs 2 flights to another courtroom, another federal judge, and testified on a case in which the Pennsylvania government and Pennsylvania state troopers were being sued for having shot a 14-year-old African-American boy who was attempting to flee, climbing over a fence. So there I was, from a courtroom as a defendant to a courtroom in the same building as an expert witness. How you like that?
Wow. Well, you are certainly indefatigable. I mean, the amount of energy that you have is staggering. But I want to go back to this original tussle you had with a case that was brought against you. You said that you were holding a public inquiry or public inquest on all cases involving the police? Because that seems very appropriate right now.
Yeah, JV, yes, thank you. I would like to say, I'm going to say it not egotistically, but proudly, that I was 50 years ahead of my time.
Absolutely.
The power of coroners, which started back in the 12th century in very old England, continued into this country. And I used that power of public inquest, the ability to subpoena witnesses, including the police officers who were involved in these matters. And they were made to testify. And the testimony came out, and then rulings would be made in a fair way by, as I say, sometimes there was a coroner's jury, other times it was just presided over by a prominent attorney, a former judge, or whatever. We did not have the power to indict. We could only recommend to the district attorney. They did not like that. And so it reached a point, finally, of extreme animus, and they conspired and brought these charges against me.
So let's back up a little bit. For people who might not understand exactly what a coroner does or what a forensic pathologist does, you're a little bit doctor, a little bit investigator, a little bit law enforcement. It kind of all comes together, but explain what the real role of those positions is. Okay, a forensic pathologist, by definition, is a doctor with an MD or a DO degree who has then spent 5 or 6 years in pathology training after graduation from medical school, including 1 or 2 years in forensic pathology at an accredited office. And that is what I did. In the meantime, during that same 5-year period, I managed to fit in 3 years of law school and 2 years as a captain in the United States Air Force at Maxwell Air Force Base Hospital in Montgomery, Alabama. So I did 10 years in 5. And I came out and I practiced. What a forensic pathologist does is that she works in a coroner or medical examiner's office. There are different jurisdictions. Most large metropolitan areas have a medical examiner system, and many other areas, including in states which don't have a state ME system, like Pennsylvania, where the ME system is to be found in 4 or 5 of the larger counties, the remaining 63 counties, for example, in Pennsylvania, and this is true in California, too, then they're run by coroners who are generally elected. In any event, it doesn't make any difference which system. What makes a difference is how the system is run. The forensic pathologist is the medical specialist working in that office who does the autopsies, makes determinations as to the cause of death, and then puts things together. Reports from law enforcement agencies, toxicological analyses that come back after specimens are submitted to them, and then ultimately the medical examiner or the coroner makes an official ruling as to the manner of death. In addition to cause of death, then you see coroners and medical examiners
has to deal with manner of death. Doctors and hospitals that sign out deaths. There is no such thing on a death certificate as manner of death. On coroner, medical examiner death certificates, there are 5 manners of death from which to choose. In decreasing order of frequency of occurrence, you've got natural, accident, suicide, homicide, and undetermined. Sometimes you may not be certain, and you leave it as undetermined or pending, waiting for further examination, further reports, further studies, and so on. So those are important, and manner of death is frequently the issue. I can think in so many cases that I've testified in, it wasn't an issue as to the cause of death. Gunshot wounds are gunshot wounds.
Right.
Stab wounds are stab wounds. Motor vehicle accident, blunt force trauma, they are what they are. But what was the manner of death? Was it an accident? Was it suicide? Was it homicide? I did an autopsy on a 17-year-old boy, tragically, a week ago. Everybody said they thought it was suicide. I reviewed everything with the state trooper and the local coroner, and based upon various things, his clothing, his attire, what he knew about guns, what he was working on, the position of the gun, and so on. And a determination was made that it was an accident. So there you are. And then other cases, it's not the cause or the manner, but it's who did it. And how was it accomplished? John F. Kennedy assassination, Robert F. Kennedy assassination, Martin Luther King assassination. We have 3 cases of death due to gunshot wounds, no question about it. In each case, fatal injuries to the heads. The question is, who did it? What do the facts? You see, the forensic pathologist then, acting further, as I do, as a medical legal consultant and analyst, then you take other things into consideration. All of the background information, all of the reports from the investigative agencies, governmental and private, and you study the case, and then you come up with your thoughts, which are then expressed in reports, depositions, trial testimony, and so on. And that's what I've been doing and continue to do as a medical legal consultant. So I do autopsies. Up until 2.5 years ago, I was doing more than 500 all by myself every year.
Wow.
2.5 years ago, I took on board a very good colleague, Dr. Jennifer Hammond. Says she's excellent, and so now we split it in half. I'm still doing about 270 autopsies myself, and I'm doing consultations for attorneys, cases from all over the country. 3 weeks ago, I dealt with a homicide case from Israel. So that's the way it goes.
So in the normal course of a coroner's office, how many, is there a percentage, and I know it probably varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but how many deaths that come through that you have to examine as a coroner would be what you would consider to be, non-suspicious or unsuspicious, natural occurring, versus the ones where you have to take a more detailed and thorough look at because of a possible foul play incident?
Yes. Well, you're quite right that these things vary from one jurisdiction to another in terms of the reporting and the decisions made by the office as to whether or not to make it a coroner or ME case.
Right.
Then once that decision is made, then the body is brought in, and then a decision is made as to whether to perform a complete autopsy or just do what some offices do sometimes, an external examination, draw some blood and other body fluids for testing, and let it go at that. What percentage? I would say that insofar as controversial cases, like the ones you mentioned, those are a relatively small percentage of cases. But when they involve a major figure, a celebrity, or a case for some other reason which seems to gather the public's great interest, like Jon Benet Ramsey, no celebrity or anything special. Other children die all the time from one kind of abuse or in one way or another, and they don't make any news outside of their local jurisdiction. Who knows? But I would say the percentage is relatively small, but they become highlighted now in the world of fiction as well as in the world of reality.
And of course, in practice, your professional career has seen its share of these controversial cases, which we're going to get to after the break. But before we go to break, I just want to point out something else that I found fascinating about your story. You talk about your childhood, and you talk about the fact that your parents were of modest means. You recognized early on that there wasn't going to be, I think the way you put it, a big inheritance or any of this for you, and you had to make something of yourself. And you set out on a path to do that. And I think that's such a powerful message, and I think that's often overlooked. In the face of challenges like that, we often find something within ourselves that allows us to excel. And you're to be commended for that, but you're also, I want to applaud the fact that you're telling that part of your story, because I think it's important.
Well, I thank you, but the credit goes to my parents, especially my father. He told me from the day I was 1 year old that I was going to be a doctor. My father was an immigrant from Lithuania, my mother an immigrant from Kiev, Russia. They met and married over in this country, and my father said, I'm Jewish, and he was very much aware of anti-Semitism, and he felt that the best thing, as so many Jewish immigrants did feel about their kids, become a doctor. That was number one. If you can't become a doctor, be a lawyer. If you can't become a lawyer, be a CPA or an engineer. But be a professional, and to some extent, be your own boss. So my parents get the credit. I'll take credit for working hard and doing all of those things, and making a decision. I will take full credit for making the decision to go to law school and to combine law and medicine and to become a medical legal consultant. I'll take credit for the law part of it.
Well, you deserve credit for it all. We're talking tonight with Dr. Cyril Wecht. He is, of course, an internationally acclaimed forensic pathologist. We're talking about his new book, The Life and Deaths of Cyril Wecht, but he's got many, many others, all very interesting, including Who Killed Jon Benet Ramsey and A Question of Murder, Into Evidence, Truth, Lies, and Unresolved Mysteries and the Murder of JFK, and many, many others. And you can get more information about all of his work by going to his website. It's cyrilwecht.com. Speaking of controversial and mysterious cases, Dr. Wecht, you kind of got your introduction to that part of your work through probably one of the biggest cases. Wasn't it the RFK assassination that kind of brought you into this type of work?
Actually, it was the JFK assassination that got involved with that case first. I gave my paper at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and then I was consulted by Jim Garrison, district attorney in New Orleans, in the Clay Shaw trial, testified before federal judge Charles Halleck in an attempt to gain access to the autopsy materials, which were designed to be sequestered for 75 years. Parenthetically, let me say tens of thousands of those pages still remain sequestered at this point in time. So anyway, I, with great unhappiness, said I could not testify because I hadn't seen the autopsy materials. Finally, in 1972, under a special clause, I got in. I was the first non-government appointed, non-government sponsored forensic pathologist given access to the autopsy materials at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And on August 24, 1972, page 1, New York Times, article by Fred Graham, their top reporter at that time, President's Brain Missing. I pointed out, which other people knew, and incredibly, immorally, unethically, unprofessionally, disgustingly disappointing, and cowardly, never mentioned, including some top-notch experts in my field. So I pointed out the president's brain was not dissected after it had been fixed in formalin to harden 2 weeks after the autopsy, and that it was missing. It remains missing as you and I speak here this evening. And then in 1975, I testified again under oath before the Rockefeller Commission for about 5 hours. And then in 1978, I testified before the House of Representatives, House Select Committee on Assassinations, which had been established the year before to reinvestigate JFK and Martin Luther King assassinations. And then I've remained active. I'm chairman of a national organization, Committee Against Political Assassinations, which holds programs every year and continues to look into these matters. Robert F. Kennedy, I was consulted by my long friend, colleague, and good friend, Dr. Tom Noguchi, who was the chief medical examiner of Los Angeles I remember Tom calling me at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, "Oh my God, Tom once again has forgotten the 3-hour time difference between L.A. and Pittsburgh." He was calling to tell me that Robert Kennedy had been shot. He did not need any advice on how to do an autopsy, but he knew that I had spoken out strongly against the government having illegally spirited the body of the president out of Parkland Hospital in Dallas. And Tom wanted to get my advice on how he could prevent that from happening with Senator Robert Kennedy. And I gave him some good advice, which he did undertake. He proactively invited 3 military forensic pathologists to attend as observers and so on. In any event, then I went out there to the Ambassador Hotel and walked through and reconstructed everything with Dr. Noguchi. And speaking of Robert Kennedy, to show you about differences of opinion, the world believes what's the problem. The background to remind everybody and refresh new people. Robert Kennedy had just won the Democratic primary in California for president, in which tantamount to getting the nomination.
Right.
They could not take him out through the ballroom. Thousands of admirers and devotees would rip his clothing and never let him out of there. So they said, "Come on, we're going to go back out through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel and get him out of here." So let me ask you, JV, what is your recollection? What was the distance from Sirhan's gun, who was there firing a gun, no question about that, in that kitchen area, Kennedy walking toward him, and Sirhan steps forward and shoots? What do you believe, you recall, what would you estimate the distance of that shooting to have been?
Oh, wow.
Well, just your thought. What do you think?
20 feet? 20 feet?
Okay. And I've been doing this with tens of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. I love it. 20 feet, 10 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet. The shot, and listen to this carefully, which killed Senator Robert Kennedy, entering just above and behind the right ear, was fired from a distance of 1 to 1.5 inches away from his head with a slightly forward trajectory. Sirhan was never that close, and certainly never behind the senator.
Wow.
And this is not Cyril Wecht's subjective interpretation. This is the official autopsy report. Look it up; it's available. Signed off by Dr. Noguchi, some members of his staff, some USC professors, the 3 military forensic pathologists that I had suggested Tom invite, and 3 civilian forensic pathologists. I being one of them. All of us signed off unanimously, unequivocally, unhesitatingly, and those tests were confirmed by criminalistic study shooting the same kind of gun against the skin, cadavers, and the white paper, which is the way you do those tests, 1 to 1.5 inches. How could that have been? You got to be asking yourself.
Yeah.
Because it never came out, JV, and the court never came out. And here now we get back into the area of criminal justice and the games that can be played. The prosecution obviously never wanted to get into that, so Dr. Noguchi was never asked on direct testimony at the trial of Sirhan, what was the distance, Dr. Noguchi, from which that shot was fired? And the defense, which was headed up by an experienced criminal defense attorney, Grant Cooper by name, never asked Dr. Noguchi, what was the distance from which that shot was fired. It was a cover-up.
Was that intentional by the defense attorney not to ask that question?
Yeah, well, he was being investigated himself by the government for some matters unrelated and so on. And so, so when I give you, these are hard facts.
Yeah.
In the JFK assassination, it's been demonstrated unequivocally through neuropathological, pathological, neurological, radiological, photographic, and acoustic studies that there were 2 shooters, one on the grassy knoll behind the picket fence and one from the rear. There's no question about it, no question at all, which is why, of course, the brain was never dissected, because it would have shown 2 different hemorrhagic tracts and would have shown conclusively at that time that there were 2 shooters. So they handled it, they covered it up from beginning to end. They took the body of the president out of Dallas illegally. The autopsy should have been done and would have been done by a competent forensic pathologist, medical examiner. Name was Earl Rose. We had met back in the Air Force. I knew him, and they took the body to Washington, D.C., and the autopsy was done at Bethesda Naval Station by 2 career naval pathologists.
Yeah.
Listen to this. listen to this carefully, JP. President Kennedy, multiple gunshot wounds. You got to determine which is entrance, which is exit.
Right.
You got to determine angle, range, trajectory, sequence, and then you got to correlate those wounds with the wounds of Governor Connolly, who was seated directly in front of him. That is an extremely formidable task that 2 or 3 forensic pathologists of great experience would sweat over. So these 2 guys were called in, Humes and Boswell, who had never done a single gunshot wound autopsy in their entire careers.
Wow.
Never had done a single gun. Isn't that disgusting to you as an American citizen? I don't care what anybody's politics or beliefs are. As an American citizen, I toss this challenge out to people every time I speak. I'll give you a trip free in the Caribbean island resort of your choice if you find one country where the president, prime minister, king, other major official has been assassinated, where the autopsy was not done by the Medical Legal Institute, the top forensic pathologist in that particular country. Not one.
Right.
But here in this great country of ours, and people don't know this, So those people, and they are a minority, and have always been a minority, who have bought the Warren Commission report, and they should know the evidentiary burden that they begin with, that they are stuck with, that the autopsy, they would be ripped apart. And the missing brain, that would not have been tolerated. In many courts, it's very likely that that would have been considered evidence of a serious nature, and the legal doctrine on that is called spoliation. The word spoil, spoliation of evidence, which would have led properly to the case being thrown out, because the defense could not present its defense for Oswald in a full, unfettered fashion without having had the brain examined. So, that's the way it works.
And I just want no, it's okay. I just want to make something clear here. When we talk about the missing brain, and that's something that, we've talked about on this program a lot. We've had a lot of folks on talking about the JFK assassination. But when we talk about that, I don't think everybody understands the importance of that. The fact that it wasn't there and it wasn't able to be dissected tells us what, Dr. Wecht?
Well, when you have a brain that requires special study, and that would be the case of a brain that's been damaged by gunshots. The brain is a very, very viscous, thick liquid, perhaps as much as it is a solid. You can't examine it in a fresh state because it will fall apart, literally fall apart. You place it in formalin, which is the fixative solution that permits tissues to harden. Used in hospitals when specimens come down from the OR, and it requires some preservation. So the brain was submitted for formalin fixation properly for 2 weeks. And this is in the record. Go and look. On December 7th, the pathologist went back, and then in the report it says serial, which means parallel sections, serial sections of the brain are not made in order to preserve the specimen. Preserve the specimen for whom? For Jackie Kennedy's mantelpiece? For her children or grandchildren?
Right.
Unbelievable.
Right.
Well, and some people say, well, the family took the brain and they buried it. Well, no, if they took the brain and buried it, they would have simply said that would have been the case. You referred to my political career. I was chairman of the Democratic Party, ran for the U.S. Senate back in the 70s. When I was chairman, we would invite a major political figure to address our huge rally that we had once a year. And we invited Senator Ted Kennedy. It was in the late 70s. I picked him up at the airport, sat with him in a limousine, sat next to him for 3 hours at the banquet, drove him back to the airport in the limousine, just he and I in the rear. He never said a word to me. And by that time, I had already spoken out very frequently about the president's brain missing. Don't you think he would have said, Cyril, please, the brain was buried, and it's embarrassing to the family and our children and grandchildren to talk about, my brother's brain and so on. No such word was ever uttered. There's no basis at all. There's no record of any kind that indicates the president's brain was taken. In fact, it wasn't taken because there's a memorandum in April of 1965 which lists everything that was there in the archives, and then they did an inventory a year and a half later in October of 66, when I went in 72, as I told you, the first non-government sponsored Friends of Pathologists Given Access, there I was holding those two documents in one hand, 65, and the other hand, the 66, with the specimens in front of me, and lo and behold, the large tin box that contained the brain with formalin was no longer listed in 1966. In that 1.5 year interval, it went missing, along with a couple of other photographs and x-rays. That is the story of JFK.
Wow. And we could spend a whole night talking about that alone. We could spend a whole night talking about every one of these cases, but I do want to bring up one other point with the JFK assassination, because not only did you consult on Oliver Stone's film JFK, but you're one of the first people, aren't you, to examine the Zapruder film?
Yes. Dr. Josiah Thompson, known as the nickname Tink, called me. I did not know him at that time. He was a consultant for Life magazine. He was a professor at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. He called me and asked me if I would go to Life magazine headquarters to study the Zapruder film with him. I eagerly accepted, and we went there. And in December 1966, I had the opportunity to study the Zapruder film. Let me explain to people very quickly. Abraham Zapruder, a woman's clothing merchant, went to Dealey Plaza that day. He stood on a parapet. His secretary braced his leg, this elderly gentleman, while he took pictures with his 8mm camera. And so the cars came down Main Street, turned right onto Houston, and then left and downhill onto Elm Street. And he started his camera. The camera was tested by the FBI and Eastman Kodak, and it was determined that 18.3 frames of the film moved through that camera per second. There's not a word you can utter, a thought you can entertain, a movement you can make 18 times in 1 second. You can study the shooting of President John Kennedy, the wounding of John Connally at 1/18 second intervals. They took each little 8mm frame, blew it up into an 11 by 15-inch picture, laid them out on X-ray view boxes, and you move around from picture to picture. You're moving 1/18 second in time, and you're studying the assassination. That was a magnificent opportunity, and I've continued to work with Ting Thompson, who has written some excellent books on this.
Let's talk about Jon Benet Ramsey for a minute. You were called in to take a look at this case as well, and this is one that still bothers a lot of people, and probably with good reason, Dr. Wecht.
Absolutely, with good reason. I'll tell you, my family, we took our usual Christmas, New Year's holiday with the kids. I came back to my office, and I remember it was January 2nd, January 3rd. I get a call from the National Enquirer asking me if I would look at a case for them. And I said, sure. So they send me these pictures, and I'm looking at them. I remember, when you're down in the islands, you don't get the New York Times every day. Mm-hmm. And I remember something vaguely about a little girl being killed or so on. I'm looking at the pictures, and in fact, for a moment, gee, this looks like a midget. And I'm looking at these pictures. This beautiful, beautiful little girl dressed up by her mother in some fantastic costumes, one of which would make a showgirl in Las Vegas green with envy.
Hair and makeup, hair and makeup.
Unbelievable. So in any event, then they sent me the autopsy report, and then I began to study it and so on. And I continued my studies in many different ways, and then I wrote a book with Charles Bosworth, Who Killed Jon Benet Ramsey, and it's available. I recommend people who are interested in that case. It's just a paperback. It's not expensive. But it's the second edition. It contains the autopsy report in every detail completely, and the judge's ruling on some preliminary matters. The case was badly handled from the very beginning. Instead of calling in homicide detectives from Colorado State or homicide detectives from Denver or FBI, it was handled by the local police. They had one homicide that year, one homicide the year before in Boulder County. The ineptitude was unbelievable. And then you had Alex Hunter, the district attorney. His plea bargain rate was 98 to 99%. I'm not prosecutorially biased at all, and I'm all for, dealing with people in a fair way. But 98, 99% plea bargaining, that kind of tells you that he wasn't much of a prosecution. The case itself, smells from high heaven. Instead of Patsy Ramsey, well, let me go back. Patsy Ramsey and her family visited friends on Christmas Day. They came home, and then the story that they tell is they went to sleep right away, and in the morning when she got up to make breakfast before they left for their holiday vacation, she saw this piece of paper leaning against a step, and it said it was a ransom note. And so she goes up to the little girl's bedroom. She's not there. And goes to her brother's room, Burke, 3 years older, next door. She's not there. So she calls the cops right away. Cops come. They search the house. They do not find the little girl. It's 6:30 in the morning. In the meantime, John Ramsey invites his then best friend, another multimillionaire businessman, Fleet White, who was soon to become his worst enemy, who later took out full-page ads, essentially accusing John Ramsey of being responsible for his daughter's death. In any event, Ramsey invites Fleet White and his wife, and Ramsey's minister and his wife to come over to the house. And about 1 o'clock, 7 hours later, John Ramsey says to Fleet White, "Gee, let's go look again. Let's go look again."
Mm-hmm.
And he takes them down in the basement, and there's the room that the cops looking for the body of this little girl never even knew existed. They did not even know the room was there. A maid who worked in that house for a year did not know for several months that there was such a room. And again, I repeat, the cops are looking for a body.
Right.
This isn't a 5,000-room hotel in Beijing or Moscow.
Right.
It's a house. It's a big house. And they didn't even know the room was there. So, according to Fleet White, John Ramsey turns the switch on, and before the eyes could adjust to the light, Ramsey's exclaiming, "Oh my God, there she is!" And there was the little girl covered by a blanket. So then they finally get around to calling the coroner, who doesn't get there for several hours. In fact, didn't get there until 8 o'clock that evening, and then the autopsy was done. The autopsy revealed some interesting findings, which other people simply had not put together. And to me, they draw a clear picture. There was no evidence of a brutal sexual assault. There were no lacerations or external injuries to the vulva or the vagina or the pelvic region. What there was under the microscope chronic inflammation of the vaginal mucosa, which means something 48, 72 hours or more. Chronic inflammation, the delicate lining in the mucosa of the vagina. At the 7 o'clock position, there was focal superficial erosion. 7 o'clock position. Picture a woman going to the gynecologist for examination. Not to be crude, she's on the exam table, and the right-handed gynecologist is performing a gynecological examination. He's using the forefinger to see if he feels any lesions, evidence of a tumor or whatever. 7 o'clock position, and then under a microscope, using a blue light, birefringent material is seen. The most universal source of birefringent material in all our households. Not the only one, but the most universal source is talcum powder. So you get the picture here. I'll draw it for you.
Please.
Patsy Ramsey had stage 4 ovarian cancer. She was out of the sex business. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. The little girl, in my opinion, was a surrogate for her mother. It was a game that the father played with the little girl. That's what I believe happened. There was no intent to harm the girl. I'm not exculpating him at all. But obviously, it's a homicide. But the point I'm making is it wasn't first-degree murder. Nothing planned to kill the little girl.
Right.
The rope around the neck, interestingly, was over the thick collar. The collar was brought up around the neck to make sure that the rope never touched the skin of the neck. And then the rope continued down to the right wrist, again overlying his sleeve, pulled down to make sure that the rope never touched the skin, not to leave any telltale marks. And then the little girl died. She had an 8.5-inch fracture of the head, but that is not what killed her. She had only 7 cc's of blood in that cranial vault. When somebody smashes your head or mine, anybody's head, with producing a fracture like that, you're not going to die right away. The bleeding is going to occur, subdural hemorrhage, and then you're going to die from the accumulation of blood. 7 cc's is 1.5 teaspoons. That was just from the release of the damaged small vessels. She was already dead or dying when that blow was inflicted, to cover it up and make it seem that it was that kind of a brutal murder. And then we have the ransom note. We represent a small foreign faction, and the ransom demand was $118,000. You like that? Is that a nice round number? 118,000.
Awfully specific, yeah.
Yeah, that's the bonus amount that John Ramsey got from his company the year before, $118,000. And then this pervert, this so-called outside intruder, which the family has conjured up, outside intruder who was able to get into the house without awakening anybody, knew where the little girl's bedroom was, knew about a back set of stairs that lived in the basement to this room, which I told you about, was so obscure that the cops even missed it. He did all of that, and then he decided, I've had my pleasure sexually here. I'm going to make $1 out of this and make it a financial, wonderful evening also. Oh, Dan, I forgot to bring pen and paper. He goes around the house in the middle of the night, total darkness. He finds pen and paper, starts to write a ransom note. He doesn't like the first note. He crumples it and throws it to the ground. And then he proceeds to write the note that I just referred to. We represent a small foreign faction, and asking for $118,000. And then he left the house without awakening anybody. He made one mistake. One mistake. You know what the mistake was, JV?
What?
This is the other question I lost to her a lot of answers. One mistake. He left the body of Jon Benet, a 45-pound body. Mm-hmm. You just did everything. You wrote the ransom note. Take the 45-pound body with you. You drop it in the back of your car, throw it into the woods, down the sewer, whatever. He leaves the body after writing the ransom note. You like that? That is the Jon Benet Ramsey case. They'll find an outside intruder when I have hair. I'm essentially without hair. When I have hair, my own, that grows down to my waist, like Troy Polamalu of the Pittsburgh Steelers used to have, that is when the outside intruder will have been found.
We're going to talk about a couple other cases too, but I want to just ask you, when you study this material and you consider the circumstances of the case, and as you just described them to us, in a great deal of detail, does it put a burden on your shoulders? Do you feel a weight from that?
Yes, I do, and you can see, JV, I speak with passion.
Yes,
and it's not feigned, it's not forced. And my God, how many times I've spoken about this? It just comes to me, my anger. Yeah. My emotional, intellectual distress as a human being, as a doctor, as a forensic pathologist, as a medical legal person is so great that it never goes away when I talk about JFK and RFK and Jon Benet and other cases, because when I think about the way justice was suppressed, justice was perverted, it's sickening. It's absolutely disgusting.
It is. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this one, but I do want to mention the Delbert Ward case. For a couple reasons. I saw the documentary My Brother's Keeper, which I recommend to anyone. Yeah, wonderful. Fantastic piece of work. But also, that all occurred in a town called Munnsville, New York, which is adjacent to a town called Oneida, New York, where I owned radio stations for several years. So I'm very familiar with the area and was very familiar with the story. In fact, my radio stations, just prior to me owning them, covered the whole story. But that is a fascinating case. What was your involvement with that?
Yes, I was contacted by attorneys, and I went up there and examined everything. Delbert Ward was one of four brothers. I think and they were 5'1", 5'2", small guys. Yeah. They lived in a small shack, no running water, no electricity, left to them with 30 head of cattle by their parents. And they would go in each morning inside an old jalopy 2 on the running board and to get a cup of coffee and go back. And one day, one of the Ward brothers dies, and for some reason or another, the local medical examiner called it asphyxiation, mercy killing. And I showed that it was not so. And I went up there and I testified. It was marvelous the way the townsfolk came out in support of these guys. They raised a little bit of money and so on. I don't even think I charged in that case, other than maybe some basic expenses. And it is depicted beautifully in that wonderful documentary that you referred to, My Brother's Keeper. I recommend people should see this. I thank you so much for bringing it up because people don't know about this case. It did not get the kind of coverage that it should have. But that is the story of Delbert Ward. An interesting thing in that background, you may know something about it, so you say you're up there. I came to learn that a state trooper had his eye on that property.
Yes.
And,
yes.
and he kind of influenced the medical examiner on that call. There was no basis for it at all. It was a death. There was no mercy killing involved.
Yeah.
It was a natural death. One of them became sick.
Yeah, these four brothers, none of them were married, virtually illiterate, all four of them, lived together, as you said, in unbelievable conditions, but that was their life. And
incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to talk to somebody who's familiar with that case.
Let's talk a little bit about, and this is because my chat room is egging me on with this one, Kurt Cobain. The official account of Kurt Cobain was that he was doing drugs and he shot himself with a shotgun, right? Isn't that the official story?
Exactly. Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, grunge music, whatever it was called.
Yeah.
So I got contacted by a young gentleman named Ben Stadler. They were putting together this documentary, which, by the way, is an excellent documentary, soaked in bleach.
I've seen that one too. It is I've seen it too. It's fabulous.
Yes. Yeah, I recommend people see that. So here's the story that Kurt Cobain, he was in an apartment above the garage, which is separate from the house, and that he took drugs and he shot himself. So here he had enough heroin in him to have killed four different people if it had broken down into four separate components.
Wow.
He had a small kit, a beautiful little brown kit, in which he had his syringe and his needle, a tourniquet, some drugs, a Band-Aid, a cleansing piece to wipe the skin. And so here is a story that he shot himself up with that dose, and then he cleaned off the needle, detached it from the syringe, cleaned out the syringe, put them all back in neatly into this brown case, and then he took a shotgun and shot himself. It doesn't work that way. Heroin injected goes to the brain in a matter of seconds. Many of our drug deaths, we find people with the needle still injected in them, the tourniquet still in their arm, with the needle possibly lying close to them like that. You're in heaven. You're in nirvana. You don't go and shoot. And the position of the gun, which I get into detail in that documentary, didn't fit in either. Kurt Cobain, I believe, was murdered. I do not believe it was a suicide. It was never properly investigated. It was handled immediately by the local cops as a suicide. No study was done, no investigation of the scene, or footprints, fingerprints, physical evidence, hair, trace evidence, nothing like that. And that's the way it was wrapped up.
And
incredible.
There was a private investigator which was featured in that documentary that talks a lot about a lot of the evidence pointing to his wife, Courtney Love.
Yes,
do you have an opinion? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, he did a great job. That private investigator, a wonderful job.
Do you have an opinion on Courtney Love in that case?
Well, I've only been told that she's one tough cookie. I do know that Kurt Cobain was in the process of getting a divorce.
Yeah.
They had millions of dollars and so on, and that the relationship was strained, to put it mildly. And if the divorce went through, she would have been screwed out of millions of dollars. It's not that I'm hesitant about accusing her. I think that it's most likely that it was engineered by her. I don't think that she herself is the one who killed him, but it could easily have been accomplished. But I just don't know enough, to say that. That's the background information. But I do believe that it was a murder and by no means a suicide.
How did OJ Simpson get away with what he did? And I'm assuming that's what you think as well. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, well, half and half. I think that my opinion is that, and I was consulted in that case, and spent time. Lee Bailey came to my house, spent a day and a half, 2 days going over everything with me and so on. I did not testify because by that time I was speaking out so frequently on national television, and then they had my good friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Bodden, excellent forensic pathologist, testifying. So I did not testify, but I studied the case and spent a lot of time on it. I do believe that OJ was there with the second person.
Okay.
I believe the second person was his son, Jason. There's no way, in my opinion, that those two people, his wife and Ron Goldman, who came there fortuitously, unexpectedly, bringing her glasses, which had been interestingly left at the restaurant, and he was returning them after having cleaned up and so on. I'll leave that to everybody else's imagination. In any event, 17 wounds in one person, 22 other wounds in the other person. When you cut the carotid artery in the jugular vein in someone's neck, blood spurts several feet.
Wow.
Where is all the blood? They went to OJ's house, pretty darn soon afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Every sewer, sink, bathtub, toilet, and shower was carefully examined. No blood was found. They had one drop of blood on a sink. It was shown to have been planted. It contained an anticoagulant, which is in blood tubes when blood is drawn by your doctor at his office, but not in blood from your body. That was the only blood that was found. Where did all the clothing go? Where did the instrumentality go? Where did all the blood go? You don't get rid of blood. You've cut yourself, I'm sure, like I have.
Yeah.
Sometimes playing ball or something. Cut myself, for example, by the ocean, even went to the ocean, and you come out and the damn blood is still there. You got to take sand and wipe it off. So blood is not, and the tests for blood are extremely sensitive. So when I say that no blood was found, that means no blood was there. So that's the OJ case. I do believe that there was a second person. I think it got out of hand. Jason was known to have a temper, and his stepmother had disappointed him. She was supposed to have gone to his restaurant that night where he worked, and she went to another restaurant, and I think he was pissed off. He went to, in fact, they had him signing out that day from the work, and that's never been accounted for. So I think that, that's what happened, and OJ bit the bullet as a father. And he wasn't going to get out of it.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make a whole lot of difference. Then the trial was interesting, too. How did he come to be acquitted? That's interesting.
That was one of the first that we all watched play out on television.
Yes. The most brilliant cross-examination that any law student could ever study is that performed by F. Bailey on Mark Furman. Question after question after question, and finally leading up to, and so, Detective Furman, as you sit here today on the witness stand under oath, are you saying to His Honor Judge Ito and the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, 9 of whom were African Americans, that you have never used the N-word? Well, it was documented in his record that he used it a couple of times and had been disciplined for it. Yet Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, the prosecution attorneys, arrogantly went ahead and used him as a star witness.
Yep.
They didn't have to do that. And in my opinion, the jury said, screw you, the prosecution. You're going to give us this racist, this anti-black person as a major witness, and you want us to go along with it. And that's what led to the acquittal. And then, of course, in the civil case, where the evidentiary burden not as high, but Mark Furman was not used in the civil case, and they got that $33 million verdict. I don't know how much of it they ever collected. So that's the story.
We have just a couple of minutes left with you, but I want to emphasize the fact that in the book, you go through dozens of these cases, and they're all cases that people would recognize the names of, like Jeffrey Epstein is one of them. We're talking about the Menendez brothers, Scott and Laci Peterson. These are all cases I would love to talk about tonight.
Ron Brown and Vincent Foster and Waco Branch Davidian and Gene Harris and they have an entire cardiac diet doctor, and Phil Spector. Oh yes, they're all
so
there.
Many. And
Touched them.
And in the time we have left, I want to touch on two, 1 and 1.5, really. The Casey Kaylee Anthony case. That's another one that just breaks my heart. What's your opinion of that case? What did you find when you looked at that?
I was initially consulted, spent time with the defense attorney, gave him my thoughts. He did not like them, and I wound up then dropping out of the case. I think that is the most absurd, unjust verdict that I can ever think of, that I have ever experienced in all my years, to have exonerated her.
Yeah,
I think the prosecution went too far in charging her with first-degree murder. Mm-hmm. They should have, gone after manslaughter and so on. I think the jury balked at coming in with first-degree murder and maybe executing her. I think, unbelievable. My recollection is that she, the mother, Kaylee, testified under oath with her father sitting in the courtroom that the little girl had drowned in their swimming pool, and that her father went and buried the body of the little girl, remember, who was found sometime later. Can you believe that? Where did that jury come from? A jury from hell.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an amazingly sad case. Now, the last one I'm going to ask you about here is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I know you looked at this. But we talk about aliens on this program every once in a while, and you took a look at the controversial alien autopsy. Did you really take a look at that?
Well, I looked at the television film, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Fox News invited me. I went down and looked at it. And my comment was that it's unlike anybody that I've ever seen.
Uh-huh.
Some people have made fun of me for not immediately saying it's an alien. Let me say that they went to the top Hollywood makeup artists, and they were puzzled too. It came to be shown to be a farce, but it was very cleverly done.
Yeah.
And I said what I think was appropriate. It's unlike anybody that I have ever seen. What the hell more can I say?
Right,
Interestingly, look this up, by the way, since you're in that case. There's a statement that came out from a recently retired top-level Israeli general scientist who claims that American authorities and others are aware of aliens, and there has been even some possible meetings or so on.
Yeah,
but it's not. I don't know. The only thing I do say is when people dismiss these things in one brief second is that it's hard to believe that with billions of galaxies, that there's not some other form of life out there. So to be so dismissive, and to think that no other kind of life is possibly extant in any one of those galaxies. And when you consider the number of light years that it takes to get from one to the other, no, you and we won't be around. Who knows?
Yeah, and we don't dismiss that on this program. We talk to a lot of folks who do this kind of work and research these ideas, and we take it all very seriously. I'm going to ask for your forgiveness just to keep you for just two minutes longer, but I want your opinion on something. Okay. Something I read in the book. You talk about early in the book. You talk about the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and how Americans at that point, foolishly in some cases, gave up freedoms for security. And there's a famous quote by Ben Franklin talking about those who do that deserve neither. Given what we're seeing happening today, do you have a different opinion about that now? Given the fact that we're looking at not a terrorist calamity, but a public health calamity.
Well, there was a public health calamity indeed, and I was appointed to a special committee to study the after effects, and I played a role in expanding what had originally been put together, whereby a lot of the first responders would have been denied benefits.
That's right.
For problems that they developed. I'm very proud of that. I played a significant role in disputing the thoughts that came from some local authorities. So I think that there were health benefits, and these are things that needed to be played out, recognized, analyzed, and properly compensated for.
But the idea of giving up freedoms for security, I mean, we see, we're kind of doing that on steroids right now. Hopefully it's temporary.
Patrick Henry says, I think it's Patrick Henry, look it up, the person who would give up liberty for safety deserves neither.
Deserves neither. That's right. That's right. My final question, Dr. Wecht, is you also say in the book that you wrote this for your children and your grandchildren and your close friends. You wanted them to know your story. Do you think you accomplished that goal with what you produced?
Yeah, well, I think so. And with people like you who are giving me the opportunity to talk and promote the book, people truly are enjoying the book. I must say, I'm very pleased, somewhat pleasantly surprised, the comments that I'm getting from all kinds of people. I gave, obviously, the book to each of my 4 children, and then I also gave one to each of my 11 grandchildren, and in each of these books to the grandchildren, I wrote in to, their name, and I said, to so-and-so, and I said, please share this book with your grandchildren someday.
Oh, that's great. That's terrific. This has been a fabulous show. Before I let you go, where can people buy the book if they want to read it? Because it's a fantastic. Your book, Dr. Wecht, could be a multi-season television show all by itself.
Well, I thank you, and we're kind of looking into that. People can buy the book, I think, easiest from Amazon, as well as there are many major bookstores, Walmart and Barnes & Noble, and so on. Directly from the publisher, McFarland in North Carolina. What I've been told by many people is the easiest way is to just do it on Amazon.
Yeah. Well, again, this has been a fantastic discussion. I know you don't release a book every 6 months or so, but I hope you do have an opportunity to come back on the show because it's been fabulous.
You've been a magnificent host, and I must say this quite seriously, that you've been the most knowledgeable person that I've been interviewed by in terms of the cases that you know about, the familiarity that you have. So it's been a real pleasure staying up this ungodly hour for me. I thank you so much for your courtesy, and it's been a great pleasure sharing this hour and a half with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well. And coming from you, Dr. Wecht, that means a lot.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.